right? So students, for terms like this, I will highly appreciate if you can also, Google sometime, because it takes some time to discuss this thing and it's not very important from exam point of view. Okay, so fiscal drag happens basically when there is inflation taking place. Now listen to this very carefully. There is inflation taking place, right, in the economy, and a person moves from a low tax bracket to a higher tax bracket. How? Let me tell you. When someone moves from lower tax bracket, income tax bracket, right? Income tax, I mean, income tax bracket to a higher income tax bracket due to a higher income tax bracket due to inflation, right? Now think about this. What happens when there's inflation taking place, right? So prices are going up, right? Prices are going up and people's purchasing power is decreasing. Is this simple? Okay. Now, what do companies do in such a case? So companies will give you some increase in your, salary, right? So think about this. If let's say 10% inflation is taking place, which means that on average every year goods and services become expensive by 10 years. So most companies in any economy will give you some increase, some in your salary, right? Some bonus, some increase in your salary. So to protect you against inflation. Now think about this. What happens? So let's say you get 8% increase in your salary, or let's say 10% increase in your salary, then what happens? If previously someone was earning 100,000 rupees, you will then start earning 110,000 rupees due to 10% increase, let's say, right? Or if that was an 8% increase, you will start earning now 108,000 rupees per month. Now think about this. The way income tax is calculated in all countries of the world, that they look at how much amount is coming to your bank account. They don't look at whether the increase was due to inflation or not, right? Say they are the income, income tax department is only looking at how much salary is coming to your bank account. So they will see that previously you were earning this much, and after increase you're earning this much, right? Even though this increase was only according to how much was the inflation in the country, they will still put you in a higher tax bracket. So if previously you were paying a tax of 5%, now you might have moved to a higher tax bracket and you might be paid, you might be imposed a tax of 5.5% or 6% or something of the sort. So long story short, what is income fiscal drag? Fiscal drag is when someone moves from lower to higher income tax bracket, moves to higher income tax bracket due to inflation, moves to higher uh, moves to higher income tax bracket due to inflation, right? Sorry about that. Moves to higher income tax bracket, fiscal drag, right? Sorry, what am I doing today? Right? Is known as inflation. Is it making sense? Right. Right? Isha, is this clear? Right? So what happens in fiscal drag, that due to the increase in salary that the person gets, right, your nominal income is increasing. Your real income isn't increasing. Your nominal income is increasing. Now think about this. So in terms of purchasing power, you're still not better off because prices have also gone up by 8% or 10%, right? But because the income tax department only looks at the salary that is coming to your bank account, they don't really calculate your real salary, right? They don't really look at your real salary, right? And when they see that more money is being transferred to your bank account, previously it was 100,000 and now it's 108,000, they'll start charging you higher tax, right? So previously you were, let's say, paying 5% tax, now you'll be paying 5.5% tax. Okay, now students, this being said, let's move on and let's do a paper. Let's say this is May, June 2020, but this is a different variant, right? Now tell me, do you want me to do a case study or do you want me to do an essay question? Do you want me to do a case study or an essay question? Quickly. Yeah. Case study or essay question? Okay, essay question. Let's get down to that. Okay, so these are the 6 essay questions. Every year you get 6 essay questions, and out of those you have to do 2, right? So the first question is saying over here, discuss whether competitive markets in private sector are the best way to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. So whether competitive markets in private sector are the best way to achieve an efficient allocation of resources, right? So that's the first question. Now, question 3A part says, explain what is meant by consumer equilibrium position in indifference curve theory and how it can be used to form a demand curve. That is for 12 marks. Next part of the question says, one of the world's first filmed signing commercials advertisement of soft drink. One of the world's first filmed signing commercial advertised a soft drink. It stated that for the same price, consumers would get twice as much of that drink than that of its major rival. This made it cheaper and was similar to price reduction. Its rival responded to an advertising campaign stating that its own drink was superior to the first firm's inferior product. Discuss whether it is possible to use diagrams from indifference curve theory to illustrate how a consumer might react to these two advertising campaigns, right? Then question 4 is saying a firm is fully aware of market condition and its best rational interest would be achieved by pursuing the clearly defined objective of maximizing profits. Consider whether the statement has any merits in different market structures. After negotiation, the workers in an industry obtained from employers higher wage rates. The employer spokesperson said that the cost of the deal would have to be met through improved productivity or reduction in other costs. Analyze whether this deal can be incorporated into the economic theory of wages and consider the possible outcome for employment of such a deal. 6 is saying, explain what economists mean by inflationary gap and discuss why this is considered to be an economic problem. Use diagrams to support your answer. B part of the question is saying, how far do you agree that the use of monetary policy is the most effective way to solve the problem of inflationary gap? Then it says developing countries have low levels of productivity and high dependency ratio, right? Explain the meaning of these two characteristics and consider whether they are linked. Assess the view that foreign direct investment remains the key to economic growth in developing countries. So these are all the questions. Now, which of the two do you want me to attempt? Which of the two do you want me to attempt? Yeah, attempt. Right. Yeah. Okay, question 2. Let's get started. Perfect, right? Discuss whether competitive market and private sector are the best way to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. Okay, now I would also want you to contribute with me in trying to solve the question. Okay, so the question is asking whether competitive markets in private sector are the best way to allocate resources or the most efficient way to allocate resources. Competitive markets in private sector. Competitive markets in private sector. So first thing that you have to do in this question is to explain the keywords, right? In any essay question, the best way of answering is to start your question, is to start your answer by giving some definitions of the keywords that are used in the question, right? So basically it's asking you to explain whether competitive markets in private sector are the efficient way to allocate resources. So you have to explain two things. What are competitive markets and what does it mean when you say efficient way to allocate resources? Is this making sense? Efficient way to allocate resources. Okay, now think about it, students. So the first thing first, what is competitive market? So competitive market is a market where there is a lot of competition, right? Perfectly competitive market. So the entire definition that we studied as part of a syllabus, market is with a lot of buyers and sellers. What else? What are some of the features of competitive market, right? So ideally you should tell what are the characteristics that make a market competitive market. So the word competitive means that there is a lot of competition. And what type of features should be present in a market for it to be defined as competitive? Firstly, perfectly competitive market, because that's the word that we have been using, right? Perfectly competitive market is a market with a lot of buyers and sellers, right? Then another thing that you need to know, that there are no exactly excellent products are identical or homogeneous, as we say, right? Products are completely identical, right? So there is no way to differentiate between those products. The perfect example of competitive markets can be of agricultural goods, right? Because when you go to shop to buy something, so fruits normally don't have any brand. Similarly, agricultural items don't have any brand, and so on and so forth, right? Products are identical, no entry and exit barriers, right? So these are perfectly contestable markets where there are no entry and exit barrier. No entry and exit barriers, right? Firms are price takers. Now, what does it mean for firms to be price takers? That whatever price is prevailing in the market, they will sell at that price, right? Right? Firms cannot set their own prices. They have to follow the price that is prevailing in the market. Firms are price takers. Firms are price takers, right? Okay, what else? Right? Firms are price takers and consumers have complete information. Buyers have perfect knowledge about the product and the price is excellent, right? Consumers have complete knowledge about product, you know, product quality, prices, and all that things. Consumers have complete knowledge. So you can't really, as a firm, firms cannot cheat with consumers. Consumers have complete knowledge about product quality, prices, etc. Right? Okay. Now what we did was, okay. So students, have a look at this. So the thing that we're doing, right. Competitive markets. Exactly. Think about this. So that's a very good question, Isha. So even though they haven't used the word exactly perfectly competitive, right? But we will assume that it is talking about perfectly competitive market, right? Because all of the markets are not really competitive. All the other market structures, the remaining three that we discussed in class, apart from perfectly competitive market, is monopoly. We know monopoly hardly has any competition. Then you have oligopoly. Again, in oligopoly, the number of firms are quite limited. And the third one is monopolistic competition. Yes, there is competition, monopolistic competition, but still, as the word suggests, there is also some elements of monopoly, right? Every firm has a different brand and they are charging different prices for that. So that is again not a perfectly competitive market, right? Right. Then after you have explained that perfect, right? So the question was saying, I brought you to this screen to read the question one more time. Discuss whether competitive markets in private sector are the best way to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. So you will say that perfectly competitive markets are ones where there is a lot of competition due to a lot of buyers and sellers, and then you went on to explaining all the other characteristics of perfectly competitive markets, that products are homogeneous, identical, no entry and exit barriers, firms are price takers. Whatever price is prevailing in the market, they have to sell at that point. They can't charge their own price, and consumers have complete knowledge about product quality and prices and all that stuff. Now, the second thing that you have to explain after this is, what does it mean to have efficient resource allocation? Efficient resource allocation. Now, in this, you have to talk about the two components of efficiency, which is productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. So you will say efficient allocation of resources mean making best possible use of resources, without any wastage, possible use of resources without any wastage, right? Okay, and what are the what are the two components of efficient allocation of resources, right? So there are two components of efficiency. One, we know, productive efficiency, and the other one is allocative efficiency. So then you will explain each one of these in detail, ideally with the help of a graph. If you're comfortable making a graph, it's always recommended to make one. If you're not, then you can just skip that and explain in your words, right? So what is productive efficiency? Productive efficiency is when business is producing at the lowest possible cost, right? So productive efficiency is about producing on the lowest possible cost. How do we show whether a company is productively efficient or not? We make its ATC curve. Now think about this. So for a firm, its ATC curve, which is average total cost curve, will show you whether the firm is minimizing its cost of production or not, right? So you have a U-shaped ATC like this. On the y-axis, you have average total cost. On the x-axis, you have output, right? You have output. So let's say this is the ATC, one possibility of ATC where the company can operate, and then you have another possible ATC that is lower than this, right? So let's say ATC 2, and then you have another ATC where the company can operate, let's say ATC 3, right? So if the business is operating on the lowest possible ATC curve, right? Operating on the lowest possible ATC curve, which means that you are minimizing your cost of production on lowest possible ATC curve, right? So think about this. Another thing that a lot of students get confused, that they think that you have to operate only on this point to be productively efficient, right? So they choose the lowest point of the lowest possible ATC curve and they say that this is productively efficient. No, this point A is known as technical efficiency. If you're operating on this point, obviously that is even better. But even if you're not operating on the lowest point of the lowest possible ATC curve, that's perfectly fine as long as you are operating on the lowest possible curve. Are you getting me? Isha? So the thing is, it's not necessary, it's not, always like for productive efficiency, the requirement for productive efficiency is to operate on the lowest possible ATC curve. So out of these three ATC curves that we have drawn, the purple one, which is ATC 1, the green one, which is ATC 2, and the Ferozi one, which is ATC 3. So any point on the lowest possible ATC curve, as I've labeled A, B, C, D, E, is productively efficient. But yes, if you are operating on A, so that is even recommended, that's even better. Why? So because that is the lowest point of the lowest possible ATC curve, and that is known as technical efficiency, right? Is this simple? Okay, after you explain that what productive efficiency is, that it means to minimize your cost of production, and the way you calculate it, you look at the formula output over input. So if you're maximizing your cost, which is basically, by minimizing your ATC, that would be productive efficiency. Okay, now moving forward with your, allocative efficiency, right? Now, what is allocative efficiency? Allocative efficiency means producing the right type of goods in the right quantity. What is allocative efficiency? So it comes from the word of allocation, right? How do you spend your resources? How do you use your resources? Allocative efficiency would be producing right type of products which basically means the most demanded goods, or you can also write this in brackets, which are most demanded / needed in the right quantities, right? So think about this. Allocative efficiency talks about that a country should prioritize producing goods that are most wanted and producing those products in the right quantities, right? Which is optimum level of optimum level of production, nothing overproduced, nothing underproduced, right? Now, how do we show that on a graph? So if you remember, we talked about that your allocative efficiency would be achieved when a firm is producing at the point where its demand curve intersects demand curve D equals P. Why is it equals to P? Because demand curve shows you the price. So on the y-axis you will have price, on the x-axis you will have output, where the demand curve of a firm intersects with its marginal cost. So think about this. Where the demand curve of a firm intersects with marginal cost, that would be the point of allocative efficiency. This is making sense, students? So this is the point. This is the quantity that a firm should produce, so QA. This means allocatively efficient. If a company is producing anything less than this, would that be allocatively efficient? Isha, would that be allocatively efficient if a company is producing anywhere in this range between 0 and QA, right? And the answer to that is no, because that would be underproduction, right? That would be underproduction. And similarly, if a company is producing anything more than QA, that would be overproduction, and most companies would not think of doing that. Why? Because after QA, what happens? Your marginal cost is greater than your marginal cost, as you can see, is greater than your price. So why would a company want to go to this part of the graph, right? So they will never do that. But still, underproduction, which a lot of companies do, including monopolistic competition and oligopoly and monopoly, right? So all these firms underproduce except for perfect competition that we'll talk about in a bit, right? So that is allocatively inefficient. That is allocatively inefficient. So that is what you will say, right? Only this output level is allocatively efficient, where price of the product, as you can see, which is shown through the demand curve, is equals to its marginal cost curve, which is shaped like this. Okay, after you explain all of this, the next thing that you should do is to make the graph of perfect competition. Now, this is very important thing, right? You remember we talked about the graph of perfect competition and showed how perfect competition is both allocatively and productively efficient, right? So you will have industry on the left-hand side, you will have firm on the right-hand side. So you make two graphs. If I have to quickly show you, the way it will look like is, have a look at this, right? So on the y-axis, you will have price and cost. On the y-axis, you will have price and cost, and on the x-axis, you will have output. Similarly, the other graph that you need to make is for the firm. So again, you will have price and cost on the y-axis, and you will have, right, output on the x-axis, right? So you have output on the x-axis, and you have price and cost on the y-axis. Price slash cost on the y-axis. Okay, now have a look at this. So first things first, what you have to do, right? So we are making long run equilibrium, because if you remember, we also talked about short run equilibrium, right? So think about this. Normal downward sloping will be the market demand. Now, what does market demand means? As I was telling you, right? So what is the total demand for this product in the industry, in the entire market, right? So if we are talking about, let's say, wheat or any agricultural products, because they are the ideal example, they are the perfect example of perfect competition, where perfect competition exists, right? So you can take the example of, right, any agricultural good, that can be wheat, that can be some fruits or anything of the sort, right? So downward sloping will be the market demand, which means that what is the total quantity of wheat demanded in Pakistan, right? Then you'll have upward sloping supply curve, which shows what is the total market supply made up by all the producers, all the farmers who grow this product in the market, right? Okay, now where the two intersect, that will be your market price, right? That will be equilibrium price, as we say. So that would be, let's say, P1, right? So this is the price of each kg or each ton of wheat, right? Do we have to? Okay, now think about this. So you can do that, but I mean, then it will make two, then you will be required to make two graphs. So why I'm saying in the long run, because even in the short run, it's productively and allocatively efficient, but as far as the graph is concerned, you can just make the final one, which is the long run, because the more permanent situation is the long run equilibrium in perfect competition. So even if you skip the short run equilibrium graph, that's not a problem, or you can quickly show that, right? That totally depends on the time, and if you're able to manage that within time, right? So in fact, you can also show the short run. The only difference would be, let me show you right here, right? So this is the price, which means that each quantity of wheat is being sold for 100 rupees or 120 rupees or whatever it is, right? So why is the demand curve for a firm perfectly straight horizontal line? Because it shows perfectly elastic, right? As I said, so this thing explains you that firms in perfect competition are price takers. So they take the price that is prevailing in the market, they can't set their own price, right? So it's straight horizontal line, which is known as price take risk. Okay, now moving forward from here, have a look at this. The next thing that you need to add, right? So first of all, you will add the marginal cost. Now listen to this carefully. This is the marginal cost graph, just like for any other firm, it's J-shaped upward sloping graph, J-shaped upward sloping graph. Now, if this is a short run, now think about this, Ishan. So if this is a short run, we know that for the short run, the ATC of the firm would be below its price. The ATC of the firm would be below its price like this, right? So it's below this. On the other hand, so this is short run. On the other hand, if I had to make the graph for the long run, I would have drawn it like this, right? So this is the only difference, right? So this orange ATC, where the ATC is tangent to your demand curve, that's long run. And if I had to make it for the short run, this would have been ATC, the purple one, right? But in either case, we know that the firm will be perfectly and allocatively efficient. Exactly. The only difference is that in short run, the firm is earning a normal profit, whereas in the long run, they are earning normal profit. So since we're only interested in showing the long run, so I will just remove this one, right? Okay, now students, have a look at this. At what point the firm will produce? So the profit maximization quantity, right? What is the profit maximization quantity for any firm? Isha, what is the profit maximization quantity for any firm? At what output level do firms maximize their profit? Exactly. So where MR is equals to MC, where MR is equals to MC, that is the point where firms maximize their profit, right? Now have a look at this. Now this is MC, right? Marginal cost, right? And if you remember, for the demand curve, that is a straight horizontal line. The demand curve, that's a straight horizontal line. The marginal revenue is this, exactly this blue line that you can see. So it's your demand curve. It also shows you the price, and it is also showing you the marginal revenue, right? This is something that is mathematically true, right? Now, the marginal revenue, this blue line and this green line is where the marginal revenue is equals to marginal cost. So you just label this point, and you bring this quantity down. So this is your profit maximization quantity in perfect competition. So this is your profit maximization quantity in perfect competition. And then when we see that allocative efficiency point or output is also the same. Why? Because what is allocatively efficient point? Where price is equals to marginal cost. Where price is equals to marginal cost. So since this graph is also showing you the price and this is your marginal cost, so this will also be your allocatively efficient output level. Does it make sense, right? Okay, now by showing this, we have already shown that the firm in perfect competition will be allocatively efficient because they're producing at the level, their profit maximization output is the same as their allocatively efficient output level. Is this making sense? Ishan, is it making sense, right? And secondly, how do we tell that this firm is also productively efficient? So the explanation for productive efficiency is that since there is so much of competition in the market, the firm cannot afford to be inefficient. How come the firm cannot afford to be inefficient? Because just have a look at this. Even if your ATC curve is slightly higher, think about it. Even if your ATC curve is slightly higher slightly higher than what it is right now, right? That will do what? That will make you suffer a loss. Right? So you can't really afford to do that, right? Is it making sense? Right? So there's so much of competition in perfect competition that firms in perfect competition cannot afford to be productively inefficient, right? Unless they don't minimize their cost, which is at this level, right? Other firms will be charging low, prices will be low, and their cost curve, as I was showing you over here, would be higher than this, right? And that would mean that it will result in efficiency, right? It will, like, they will start making a loss and they can't survive in the market. Okay, now after you've explained, now up till this part, based on all the discussion that we have done, we started off by explaining that what is perfectly competitive market. We explained all the characteristics of that. Then we explained what does efficiency mean. That means to make best possible use of resources, to minimize wastage, and to produce maximum output. Then you explain what are the two components of efficiency, productive and allocative. Then with the help of graph, you explain what each one of these mean. You wrote the definitions. Then you made the graph and explained, obviously along with the graph, that how firm and perfect competition are both productively and allocatively efficient, right? So is this clear up till this part? But now here comes the interesting part. The interesting part is, right, what else you will write apart from this? Isha, what else will you write apart from this? Is this all? Is this always like this? Or there is something else that needs to be mentioned? Right? Look at the question one more time, right? Right? Okay. Yeah. So what else are we supposed to write in this question? This is the question, right? Discuss whether competitive firms in private sector are the best way to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. What we haven't explained. What we haven't explained in this question yet. We haven't explained that what are sources of, you will talk about other types of market structures. Yes, you can do that. Yes, that's correct. And in the process, you also need to talk about cases of market failure. Think about this. So we do know that not always firms are, operating where they should be operating, right? So not every time private firms are, efficient. Firstly, obviously, you'll talk about other types of market structures because not always perfect competition exists. Very good. Excellent, right? So first thing would be, think about this. So soon after this, perhaps you can start off by defining what is monopoly. So you'll say monopoly where there's a single producer. You'll talk about some other characteristics of monopoly, like a firm is price maker. Whatever price the firm wants to charge, it can, because it's the only producer, and it will charge higher prices. And if monopoly has inelastic demand because there's no competition, so whatever price they are charging, consumers are forced to pay that and all that stuff, right? So you will say in monopoly, if in the private sector there is existence of monopoly, that will be allocatively and productively inefficient. You can make the graph to explain how that happens. Then another thing that you can do is that you can explain other cases of market failure, which includes externalities, right? If you remember the graph for externalities, you can make up that graph. So you'll say sometimes private sector is producing externalities, right? That can be both positive externalities and negative externalities. So in positive externalities, what happens? In positive externalities, there is underconsumption, right? So think about it. If you think of COVID situation and getting vaccinated and all that stuff, so all the people, or a lot of people that got vaccinated in all these different countries, was because of the fact that government came up with different rules and policies. Now, even in restaurants, when you go, they ask you for the vaccination message or vaccination card or whatever, right? Because the government said that unless you don't get yourself vaccinated, you can't go and dine in and whatever, blah blah blah. So they used policies and regulations to encourage people to get themselves vaccinated. And how was vaccination a positive externality? Because when you get vaccinated, your chances of catching COVID is less, and obviously your chances of transferring this disease to someone else is also low, right? Is also low. Is this making sense, students? Am I making sense to you, right? Then similarly for the negative externality, what happens? Pollution takes place. And as we were talking about the other day, so government would use indirect taxes, government would use laws like pollution permits, and government will use rules and regulation to stop negative externalities from taking place, right? So there was some graphs that we discussed in class. If you're comfortable, you can make those. If not, you can just explain in your own words. That will be perfectly fine, right? Then another thing that you have to say, what are other cases of market failure? Then other cases of market failure include monopoly. We have talked about externalities. We have talked about, you can just briefly mention because this is mainly part of AS, but since these are externalities, you can say merit and demerit goods. So the problem with merit and demerit goods is that merit goods are underconsumed because people underestimate their benefits, and demerit goods like negative externalities are overconsumed because people underestimate their harmful effects, right? So then you can give some examples. Demerit goods example would be, let's say, smoking and alcohol and driving fast and junk food. And on the other hand, merit goods are things like, eating healthy, exercising, and all that stuff, right? Which are always underconsumed. Right, sure. No provision of public good. Exactly. That's also a case of market failure. Now think about this. Question was saying discuss whether competitive markets and private sector are the best way to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. Now, where the word comes discuss, always remember that there are two sides of the argument that you have to talk about. And again, another big hint in this question is that it's for 25 marks. It is for 25 marks, right? So you have to talk about what are the cases in private sector, right? Because we know markets are not always efficient, right? They're not always efficient. And what are the reasons why they're not efficient? That is what we are discussing. Monopoly, externalities, right? When there is merit and demerit goods, private sector will never produce public goods, right? Because those are non-excludable and non-rivalry, and private sector cannot make a profit out of that. So they will not produce, which is again a market failure, right? So these are all the things that you have to explain. And then you say that until and unless, now here's the conclusion, listen to this carefully. Until unless these things don't exist, right? Until unless these things don't exist, private sector will be efficient. No provision of public goods. But in case of these things like monopoly or merit and demerit goods and externalities, the private sector will fail to allocate resources efficiently. Either there will be allocative efficiency that would be missing, like in the case of externalities, allocative efficiency is missing. Similarly, in the case of merit and demerit goods, allocative efficiency is missing, or it would be productive efficiency. In some cases, like monopoly doesn't minimize its cost of production because it's the only producer, so that would also be allocatively inefficient, sorry, productively inefficient, right? Similarly, no provision of public goods is again allocative inefficiency. Why? Because there is something that is needed. We did talk about this, right? So what is allocative efficiency? Producing goods that are most wanted and needed. Public goods are needed and wanted by the public, but since it is not profitable for the private sector, they don't produce that. Mention about, I mean, you can briefly mention while talking about this, but this question is not directly asking for it. That's a very good question, right? Because this is beyond, that would be beyond the scope, because it doesn't talk about whether how the government has to counter that. Because for questions where it's asking about regulation, it explicitly says that what can the government do in case of inefficient resource allocation, in case efficiency is missing, right? What can be done to control that, right? But it's not talking about that. So that is all what you're supposed to talk about. Explain what is efficiency, what are competitive markets, how the graph looks like in perfectly competitive market, and how is that is efficient. And in the end, you just need to explain that there are some scenarios, some possibilities when efficiency